don't know anybody who owns a house. I'm even thinking like adults as well, and I know a lot of adults. Like I have a wide range of like friends, and I'm even thinking about my adult friends who could even be like 40, 30, you know, 50, like, because even when I think they own their house, no, their partner owns the house.
The concept of anyone owning a home under the age of 35 feels like just that, a concept. Because who's paying for all that? Hey guys, what's up? It's Imurgency and welcome back to my channel. And today we're talking about housing. You know, the place you live, you love, you sometimes share with roommates you don't know, and sometimes pay half your paycheck to live in a room with a shared space. And we previously talked about the economy and the job market on this channel, and more specifically how it impacts Gen Z. So that's nothing new. And because everything is so closely connected, we have touched on housing, but it's time we get deeper into it and see not only what the state of housing really is like for Gen Z and some millennials too, but more so getting into how and why we are in this position. And the answer to that may just surprise you. But for this one, we are running it back, and I'm turning the mic back over to y'all. Because similar to the 80-hour work week video, if you haven't seen that, you should have to go check that out. I did some interviews to hear directly from y'all for what y'all's experience is with this. Now, it's literally not news if you've been conscious over the past few years that the housing crisis is getting worse and worse. And like most evil, nefarious, sinister things that happen to us as Gen Z, we tend to like to joke about it. You know, the classics like, I'll never be able to afford a house because I keep spending $10 on a matcha every day. And it seems pretty standard that a lot of people have resigned the thought of ever really owning property. And that feels like the general consensus, at least online. We wanted to talk to people who have a range of housing situations to see exactly what's out there for us and what is possible. In these interviews, we tried to capture a range of what's out there, like mostly renters, some owners, and some that don't necessarily fall into either category, but may still have homeowning aspirations. Now, I don't need to tell y'all that there are frustrations within Gen Z, which we've definitely talked about in the recession video and the 80-hour workweek video, because conditions have changed so much, and the lives that we were promised if we worked hard and got our degrees just simply does not exist anymore, and we know this. But I think seeing where we all are on this journey, seeing alternative perspectives and lifestyles than ours, we can learn and make the best informed decisions for our own personal lives. Because I think the internet has skewed a lot of people's perceptions of what it means to be successful, or at least on track as a young adult. With people on social media flexing houses in their early 20s, these crazy apartments and living situations, which can make you feel like you're not doing enough, or that you're behind or have your priorities wrong. But I really hope this video gives some perspective as to what the reality is offline, because none of us are on the same track or timelines, but all of them are equally okay because we are all moving at our own pace. And I do want to also add a quick disclaimer that this video in no way is endorsing that homeownership is like the right way, because as we're going to see in this video, that's not necessarily the right path for everybody, and not everyone needs to aspire for that, and that's okay, because housing can and will look different for all of us. And while the type of housing can vary from person to person, the act of having housing should be consistent for everyone. And unfortunately, we live in a time where that is not a reality for many people. And housing prices, whether for rent or to own, are soaring. And again, we're literally always talking about this kind of stuff on this channel. And oftentimes when we do, we reference the quote unquote powers at be for largely being at fault for the conditions that we're living in. And luckily this time of year, we get the opportunity to influence who those powers at be are. Like in Virginia. I don't think I've ever done a political ad before, but I do think the times that we're currently living in do require it. And that's why I'm excited to partner with Indivisible on this video to remind any Virginian watching to not only make sure that you're registered to vote, but to also vote early or make sure you vote on this election day, November 4th for Virginia Democrats. This is one of the highly contentious elections this year because Virginians have the chance to not only flip the governor's but lieutenant governor seats from red to blue. And as someone who has lived in the DMV area and currently have friends and family still there in a time where it feels like the federal government is failing us, it's more important than ever to have our local and state governments fighting for us
and voting for a pro-democracy governor.
Virginia, your future is on the ballot. Early voting is open now, and election day again is November 4th. So make your plan today and make your voice heard. Thanks again so much Indivisible for sponsoring this video. Now let's talk about the rise of the renters market. In the good year of 2025, it's safe to assume that the majority of Gen Z are renting or living at home with parents. But surprisingly, there is a small percentage that is creeping up there of home buyers. I mean, we are the youngest generation of actual eligible home buyers, so it makes sense that we aren't taking up a huge percentage. But what is interesting to note and less tangible to find actual results in is seeing these sentiments of home buying within our generation. Is that still something in our milestone goals like other generations, or are we just nixing it completely? And as I spoke to some of y'all, it seems like there is some hope for homeowning just further down the line.
Because I'm 22 and I'm still in school, it feels like out of reach, the whole I would love to go back to thinking small town, out of the way kind of deal. Also, like, I work and go to school here, so it's just so not on my radar. It's not something that I think about.
I want to own property. I absolutely do. Unfortunately, my biggest barriers are financial barriers. As an adult, I've never really had a whole lot to my name. especially not with working restaurant and retail my entire working career.
I do want to own property. I think the only thing that's stopping me right now is time, because I'm young and I need to build up, credit and then also just finances in general. But I want to own property in like a career sense, business-wise, like an office space.
But this does differ from previous generations where things like family building and home buying were almost expected in their 20s and 30s.
Crazy that Gen Z's parents bought their houses when they were younger than Gen Z was. Like, for instance, my parents, when they were 21, purchased a home. I'm 23 and live in an apartment. And rent's going up. It's not going down. So between home prices going up, rent increasing, the just overall cost of living going up, it's kind of crazy how much times have changed from previous years where in the early 2000s, you could be 21 years old, fresh out of high school for a few years and be able to purchase a home. But now today, you can go to college, get a degree, and not be able to find a job, and let alone get a house because you're living in an apartment with probably one, if not multiple roommates.
As of April 1st, 2025, baby boomers, or the boomers, which are those aged around 60 to 75, account for around 42% of all home buyers in the US, while millennials are around 29%, meaning that boomers own the most amount of property out of all of the generations alive right now. And maybe that's because they're more responsible, maybe because they've been on the earth longer, or maybe because they're able to buy a house for like 25K, maybe a little jig, and like, I don't know, some toothpicks. And now they can be landlords.
First of all, they need to downsize. Part of the problem is that none of the boomers want to downsize, and they are in these massive houses, and the market is completely trashed because of it. And people need to stop counting out Gen Z in general, which is also why I love your channel, because people need to stop counting out Gen Z. Like, yes, sometimes we are the problem, but a lot of the times we're not. Every generation has their problems, but we're doing a lot with what we're given. We were handed a crappy housing market. We were handing a crappy economy. We were handed bachelor's degrees that don't get us jobs. And it's like, we're doing the best that we can, and we're still succeeding anyway.
Hey everyone, I was just talking to one of our managers here who's well into his 60s and just bought another house that they're going to plan on flipping to make money on. And when I mentioned that my generation has next to no probability of ever being able to afford their own homes, I was told that that's just a mindset that we're getting ourselves stuck into and that we need to think outside the box.
According to Realtor.com, mom and pop landlords, or just independent landlords, not tied to a development company, own the majority of housing real estate in the US. So it is independent individuals who are landlords and not just Blackstone. Take that as you will. Like, renting has always existed, but like, if you think about it, rent is kind of like the OG subscription service. Like a monthly charge to have a place to exist and live in. And housing has become so commodified, which is so nefarious. My hot take is that housing should be a human right, and the fact that it's only getting harder and harder to grasp is, again, nefarious. And renting, as we know, is not all fun and games, because there has been some serious rent inflation, even in the past 5 years alone. According to NerdWallet, still rents are 36.2% higher than before the pandemic. And the dramatic increase from before the shutdown to now is very hard to grapple with, especially considering how the job market is right now and how minimum wage hasn't significantly gone up in years, mixed with the fact that the places that people are renting that are having the rent increases are not getting any newer or any more premium. So I'm like, why are we doing all this? So with rent rising and salaries not so much, it's kind of hard to abide by the gold standard rule of your rent being a third of your monthly paycheck. And if that's the case for just renting, owning is a whole other ballgame.
So right now I'm living in a homeless shelter. I didn't know there were so many different types of homeless shelters. The one I'm in right now is dorm style. So it's a renovated warehouse. And then the main room, it has like really little cubicles with a bunk bed in each cubicle. There's 85 women here. Staff is great. It's a women only shelter. They have great amenities. I'm in one of their little office rooms now. And the shelter I was at before this was a renovated Motel 6. So that one was nice because it was just 2 people to 1 room and you had a private bathroom. But because of the homelessness crisis in Los Angeles and funding issues, that homeless shelter closed. So that's why I am where I am now.
Like, let's debrief for a second. There's been some speculation for a while now that short-term rentals like Airbnb and Vrbo have contributed to certain neighborhoods' families not having as much of an ability to buy a single-family home as before. And while it definitively is not a main driver for the housing crisis, it's something that some cities like Irvine and California are pushing back for to let families have a chance at buying homes first. Like, not everything is all doom and gloom. And again, this is not saying that renting is all bad either. Like, I am a chronic renter, and the majority of young people living in a big city are. That's just the reality of the situation. And while yes, it may be some people's only option, renting is a very valid choice, even if you do have prospects of homeowning. And we've heard some of those pros to renting directly from y'all.
So in my mind, if you asked me earlier in the year, I was like, I want to buy something. So at least my mortgage would be really stable so I can stay kind of near all the busy things. But now I'm more so like, oh, I don't mind renting. If I want to like pick up and leave and go somewhere else, it's so much easier. I just broke my lease recently, so I can just sign a little message, be like, I'm leaving. And they're like, okay, cool. But with a mortgage, you do have to be a little bit more conscious of like your payments. Are you going to get renters to go there? I think the responsibility with renting is better for my situation now, but I like the idea of owning in terms of the control of nothing's going to change here in my little cabana, whatever it is.
It's interesting. I've never really dreamt about owning a house that much. Maybe one day. I really like the convenience of renting and kind of the open opportunities with renting. You could go anywhere you want. If you want to live in a different state, you can just pack up and move. And when you have a house, there's a lot more commitments, and maybe it's just settling down that I don't want, but I don't really look forward to owning a house.
We'll get into the hidden costs of home ownership soon enough, and it's very valid to not want to deal with that. Because renting means you can hit up your landlord to fix things and not dealing with maintaining a property because that's just like not your job. Owning a property, on the other hand, is not just the price tag on the house. There's so many other things that go into it that people just like don't talk about, and it's a lot of time, work, and money. And heavy on the money if you want someone else to go and do those things for you.
I kind of have like, that's my hot take, is I don't think renting is something where you're putting money into nothing. You're exchanging your money for a place to stay. Like, I know people are very like, I know the landlord comment, I know it's an exchange of a service. I'm like, but we're paying your mortgage. But like, when you need a new refrigerator, I still go to my landlord. I had a white refrigerator when I moved in. And I called them, I was like, I don't want a white refrigerator, which is a stupid request, really. But I didn't want my friends to joke around me having a white refrigerator. And my landlord went and bought a refrigerator. So that's something I can do as someone renting. But if I was my own landlord, I bought my house, I had to just go and buy a refrigerator.
Okay, so we have a baseline for renting and rentership, but what does it look like to actually own? And I think a good way to start this section off, I know this is kind of academic, but is to look at this graph. Like, we all know how expensive home ownership is. And while I do think that the dollar is adjusted for inflation in this, it's still so crazy to see the drastic and dramatic increase in housing over the last 60 years. Like, this is from the US Census Bureau. So it's understandable why people feel hopeless at this prospect with everything else considered. But again, Gen Z is now at the age where some of us can join the homeowner group. And let's review a little bit of what that's like. First thing that shocked me when I was learning about all of this are really those hidden costs of homeownership. Like, owning a home is not just paying a monthly mortgage. Like, that would be nice. The main three things you have to keep in mind are property tax, fees, and homeowner's insurance. And especially if you're buying a house right now, the property taxes can be pretty expensive since it's sort of relative to the price that your house was valued at when you made the purchase. And since the homes right now are valued very highly, I'll let you do the math. The fees part are only really if you have an HOA or homeowners association or buy a condo, but that's still a monthly payment on top of your mortgage that you're paying every month. And the homeowners insurance is required for you to have in order to get a home loan. But although that doesn't cover natural causes of damage, or as this article puts it, acts of God, which I guess is pretty all-encompassing. So for all of those things, you do have to get an additional insurance on top of that. And that's something to consider what state you're buying in. Like, if you're living in LA, there are houses that are majorly expensive, and part of the cost has to go to fire insurance. And of course, lastly, I do have to harp on this one more time, just any maintenance or fixings or renovations or upgrades to your house, whether that be lawn services, routine maintenance like plumbing, electric, gas, roofing, maybe there's mold, pests, Wi-Fi issues, etc. Like, you're paying out of pocket for all of that. And many homeowners actually advise that on top of that, you keep a emergency fund for maintenance on top of the monthly mortgage and down payment for the house during the process of saving, just so you can be prepared ahead of time in case any of those emergency things do happen.
I guess a little tidbit of advice I can offer, because when I bought my house, that was like a huge worry of mine. I was like, what if this thing breaks? What am I gonna do? And then I was watching some YouTube video and I was like, this makes perfect sense. Why haven't I been doing this? They were like, I don't know who came up with this, but basically the average cost of like issues in a home is something like 1% to 2% of the value of the home per year. And so you save a 12th of that every month along with your mortgage. And then you have and that's how you create like a home savings fund.
And then another aspect that impacts homeownership is the whole concept of like the dual earner. Like obviously carrying the burden alone of paying a monthly mortgage can be hard to bear. So it makes sense why buying a home was usually the next step for a married couple as opposed to a single person. Not to say that it's not possible for anyone else, but yeah.
It's harder to buy a house by yourself. And I think that having two incomes massively allowed us to buy a house. So I think it was my mentality about like the clock starting from marriage. I think it was also my upbringing, like buying a house was always going to be a thing that I was going to do. But I think it kind of got accelerated by me getting married. And that like allowed it to be more real, because if I was by myself, I would be in an apartment. Honestly, I'd probably be with my parents. That's the other thing. We both lived at home until we got married. So that was something else that we did to like save or whatever.
So my plan is to own property. I think I've changed my, I guess, like more rigidity with being like in the States. Because I was in like a very hardcore, I had a realtor, everything was approved for like a really good loan and had a great down payment that I was saving for a few years. And I was being outbid, like, because I'm also going into the housing market as like a single woman. Like my income is very strong in tech, so I'm very comfortable with my income and my savings, but I was being outbid, I think at one point, $60,000. I was already over asking and they went 60 over me to get a home. And then I was thinking, it's not that serious. The roof needs to be done and they don't have a washer and dryer and there's radon in the basement. That's not worth paying $4,000 a month in mortgage, even though if it's stable. If I were to lose my job, tech is very, the AI bubble and things are rough right now. So if I bought my house and got laid off, I'm like in the worst position.
And that doesn't even get into the privileges of owning a home. Because of course, buying a home is a privilege. Having parents that would be your co-signers, pay your down payment in closing, or I'll even know the process in the market. There's so much to know when it comes to actually owning a home that it can be incredibly overwhelming if you don't have someone in your corner that knows what they're doing, or you yourself don't know the process or what you're doing. Even in this article by CNN stating that Gen Z are becoming homeowners, the people that they interviewed had that support from their families. And that's like no tea, no shade, because regardless, it's still a huge responsibility. But obviously having a support network to help you or even foot the bill for some of, if not all of these costs is definitely a help. And in that same CNN article, quite a few of the young home buyers credit their parents and families for the help. And even one of the buyers credits the seller for helping them with the closing costs and even some of the maintenance before actually selling the property, which just goes to show that like, yes, if we don't have like elder vultures and greedy people as the gatekeepers of selling, then maybe, just maybe, it could be possible for more young people to start buying. But that's neither here nor there.
Sometimes like you'll see those posts on Twitter where it's like 23 owns home, fully paid off car, like that like whole thing. And like I'm always very candid about this. I own a home because my mom was able to help me own a home. And I think having transparency around that is really important. I'm not gonna like sit here and pretend like I did that by myself, because I didn't. That wouldn't be honest. And most of the people I know my age that do own property are in a similar situation to me, where like they also experience and benefit from that privilege. With that privilege comes understanding that that is not the norm and that is like an abnormality. But I always try to be as truthful about that as possible, that like I own a home, yes, but I also own a home because my mom has been able to help me get that home. Like she was like my co-signer on my house and everything like that. So technically like we both own it.
Let's talk about those of us who were actually raised, you felt like you were kind of rich. You had a McMansion, 3, 4, 5 bedrooms. You went on vacations to other countries. Your parents had nice cars. My dad drove BMWs. My mom had big cars, Denali, Land Cruiser, best car ever. Stand by that. You kind of want it for nothing. You got the new iPod every Christmas. Very privileged, right? But now you're like, oh, I went to college. I actually went to grad school and I'm living in my mom's house.
As most things, some people just have more privilege when it comes to housing security and home ownership. And I do want to say that it's a very American thing to want to live individually, especially individually while you are young. Like the whole idea of financial independence and stability is the crux of the good old American dream. But for many cultures, it actually is the norm to live intergenerationally and communally. But we currently live in a Western individualistic society that perpetuates the idea that to own a home, especially if you are are young is a major flex. It's like you're just doing something right, following the blueprint to be the ideal adult and the model citizen. Even though that blueprint might not be as vibrantly blue anymore, it might even be just a little bit torn up in age with the times, but it's still considered to be like what you should be doing, especially after you've graduated college and hopefully have earned your first job. But as we know in reality, especially nowadays, even if you did land your first job, most positions don't pay you enough to actually allow you to pay off a house comfortably. And this sort of brings me to the conversation that we've had actually in another video talking about the rise of Gen Z living at home and the stigmas around that. Because while it definitely is more normalized now, at least within Gen Z, it still almost sort of feels looked down upon coming from other generations if you are in your 20s and living with your parents, because people's idea is like by then you should be self-sufficient, especially after graduating high school and college. But again, with the job market and economy that we have been so graciously left, that we're all experiencing, I think that sentiment and stigma is on its way out. And like culturally, we're getting to a point where it is a little bit more acceptable and understandable given the situation, which has honestly kind of shifted that dialogue internally, because now not as many people outwardly are going to say anything about you living at home with your parents. But from what I've heard of friends, family, and y'all, a lot of that dialogue of like feeling the shame of like, oh, I should be moving out by now, or like you feel like you're behind, or like having your adult development be arrested is coming from inside the house. And by inside the house, I mean inside the house. It's you telling yourself that, babes. And I feel like if that is the case, if that does sound like you, then you need to give yourself some grace.
I just want people to, in general, especially Gen Z, like I have a sister who's like younger Gen Z. I want people to feel okay with just having different benchmarks than maybe our parents did. I think every situation is valid. It's really just figuring out what makes sense for you and what's best for you and what is hopefully financially feasible if it's something you want to do. And if you are serious about home ownership, whether you're doing it by yourself, whether you're doing it with a partner, just having those conversations, even if you have to have them like 50 times, it's the best way to go in with a clear head and a plan. Everyone has different situations, so I don't like to assume that like one situation outweighs the other, but I hope people feel okay that where they're at in life is not linear, kind of like you said.
Like, we know that owning a home is a luxury, but I'd argue in major cities, because the market is so bad, to be able to rent your own place is a flex and is a luxury. Because the reality is, for a lot of Americans, we don't have the safety net to help pay, cover costs, and guide us through the process of homeownership. And I think the most important part of this section is to highlight the fact that everyone is truly on a different path. And I don't say that to be woo-woo, I mean that to be like real. Like, everyone is on a different path, on a different timeline, and there shouldn't be a pressure to be at a certain place before you are ready. And not because everyone around you is ready. Like, you have to be ready to make that decision for yourself, because you are the one that is going to be, one, footing the bill, and two, living with that decision. And I asked everyone I interviewed whether they owned a home or not, what their peers' living situations were and their takes on that, and this is what they said.
A lot of my friends actually own houses, but they rent an apartment.
I'm like trying to think of anyone even within 5 years of me. I don't think I know anyone that owns a house or is even thinking of owning.
Because as you can see, everyone has their preferences and should and can do what they want. Now for this next stage of the video, I do have to hop on my high horse. I do have to cape for Gen Z right now against the other generations because I'm just a little confused. And this is the section I will call the Gen Z scarlet letter of actually becoming an adult. As we know, and as we've talked about, this generation did not get the payout of adulthood that we thought we would. Going to college, getting one or multiple degrees, working hard in the legs for inflation to go up, minimum wage to stay the same, the price of everything going up, seemingly just for fun. And as we mentioned, we as Gen Z tend to take things like that are typical like negatives and spin them into positives or just meme on them on social media. Hence the whole Gen Z and corporate content vertical, which in turn spawned the whole like Gen Z doesn't want to work discourse. That is what I like to call the Gen Z work scarlet letter. However, and if you're familiar with the scarlet letter, it's basically like this brand that's put on you that's meant to symbolize like shame and like shunning, because that's essentially what was happening to Gen Z in the workforce. People were seeing younger people or Gen Z and assuming that because they were Gen Z, that they're lazy, they don't want to work, and they're not responsible. That's fine and dandy. We've handled that in another video. It's just interesting to see that that same principle is being carried over to other aspects of life. Namely, when it comes to other indicators of adulthood, like per se, housing. It's kind of like a damned if you do, damned if you don't situation where like, if you don't want to buy a home or like get your own place or can't do those things, you're seen as not meeting the moment and like not being an adult. But also if you are someone who is able to do that and wants to do that, you're looked at as like not experienced and like immature and not competitive. So it's like, which is it?
I had a close family member that was not very supportive that didn't really think that we were being serious, and that thought, you're just too young for this. And even some loan agents, some people, when we were touring houses, treated it like we were just, playing around, like we just weren't being serious, and like we weren't ready for the next step. And we got the same thing when we got married, so we were kind of used to it at that point. Like, people just don't take you seriously until you do it. So we're just like, okay, we just got to do it and show them that, we are serious.
I had a bad realtor and I had a really good realtor. I don't think they're both bad in their own way, but the first one was bad, where she wouldn't even put in my offers. What the situation was that made me fire her, because you can fire a realtor, which is great. And we went to a home. I loved it. The woman had to leave like immediately. She like broke her leg. It was a condo. She broke her leg and she couldn't get up and down the stairs. And she went over asking for that property. I'm making up numbers, but say she paid like $300,000. That was the original. And she went $350,000. So now she was selling it for like $460,000, because why not? And I was like, I'm not going to give you that much. I was like, I'll do $400,000. It's above what you originally paid. No problem. And my realtor refused to put the offer in. She was like, it's kind of a smack in the face to her because she put it at $460,000 and you're offering $400,000. I'm like, well, she wants to leave fast. I can do a quick move because it's only me. You don't have to worry about like, oh, we got to move the kids out of school. We can only do it in the summer. And she wouldn't put in my offer. So I left. And that woman still hasn't sold that home.
So when I was buying my house, you deal with your realtor and then also the like mortgage person, the loan officer. And I think that those people really thought that I was just going to be like super excited to own a home because I was like 22 and this is so exciting. And so I remember the realtor like really seeming surprised whenever like she took me to see certain houses, and I was like, I don't think I want to live here. I don't love the neighborhood that much. The house seems kind of old. Like different little things would come up, and I think she was genuinely pretty shocked by that. She was just like, I mean, we have to put an offer somewhere, it's a house, especially she showed me, I ended up buying a ton, but she showed me a few single family houses. And she was just like, it's a whole house. And I was like, this house is like so old. It looks dusty. I don't want to live here, So I do think there was an expectation that I just be okay with things, and also that I not be very, intentional in the process. I didn't know a ton about homeownership, but I knew enough to know like this is a huge thing that I'm doing. And so I asked a lot of questions, like with the down payment assistance, like I was asking, so how do these programs work? What's going to happen? Why should I choose this one over that one? And I remember one of the first loan officer that I worked with really didn't like that at all. So I ended up working with somebody else because I was like, you're going to answer my questions. I'm signing up for a lot of debt here. But yeah, definitely, I think there was an expectation because of my age that I just would kind of trust them to do everything, kind of just go along with everything and be just like, oh my God, I'm getting a house, rather than, being someone who wanted to be informed.
And of course, these examples aren't every single case, but it is interesting to note that for some Gen Z, we're not being taken seriously in comparison to older families, and couples are just older people, regardless of if the credit, the cosigners, or the income is comparable. Like, while it is still technically possible for young single people to own, it might be harder to get that pre-approval for a home loan. Generation Z, though still a small segment of the market, 3% of all buyers, have the highest share of single female home buyers at 30%. And like millennials, they tend to purchase older homes compared to other age groups. Gen Z is slowly entering the housing market with the lowest household income, and they're more likely to be single than other buyers. So absolutely, it's not impossible to buy a home being single or being Gen Z, but it definitely can be more challenging because you'd probably need a cosigner or hope that a couple isn't applying to that house as well, because double income is more competitive. Which actually leads to the next topic around how shockingly the loneliness epidemic, she keeps coming back around, and trash dating sphere in a roundabout way are also kind of tanking our chances at homeownership. I know. I didn't think that would be a sentence I would say either, but walk with me for a second.
This first graph shows just how bleak the current situation is. Back in 1970, half of 30-year-olds were married and homeowners. That's just unthinkable for Gen Z. Kids these days aren't just magically lazier than previous generations. We work just as hard as our parents did. And like them, we were raised to strive for the American dream. That's the promise of a stable and dignified life available to everybody who's willing to work hard for it. And the textbook example was homeownership. It's the place to raise your family and build the wealth that you'll pass on to your kids. We're told to put in our 40 hours of work every single week, but work just doesn't pay like it used to. Americans haven't gotten a raise since the 1980s. Wages haven't increased faster than inflation and cost of living. So even if it seems like our paychecks are higher, we've got less left in our pockets after expenses like healthcare, housing, and insurance.
We love to talk about Gen Z and dating and love. It's one of my favorite topics ever. But truly, I say this all the time, but everything is connected. As we just talked about, buying a home on a single income is incredibly difficult as it is, and you may need a cosigner if you don't have an insane income. But a dual income home, a double earner, a dink if you will, or even a twink,
So me and my boyfriend were talking about money stuff earlier, and he was like, well, we shouldn't stress too much because we're twinks. I was like, what? And he was like, yeah, twinks. 2 income, no kids. And I'm like, it's dinks. We're not skinny gay men. Like, what do you...
Is more secure for payments and all the other costs that come with owning a home. So when we connect this with the Gen Z loneliness epidemic, where people just are statistically dating and getting in relationships less often, one definitely impacts the other. If people are more single and isolated now more than ever, with rising housing costs, then it would make sense that it would be harder than ever to become a home buyer because more people would just have single income as opposed to a dual income. Especially since these realtors and sellers prefer selling people with a better financial safety net, i.e. couples and families because of the multiple incomes, which just adds another barrier to people who just might want to buy their own home. And the irony here is that it's harder for single people to be actually alone, because if you have no friends, community, or partner, you might need to be a renter longer. And if you live in a city like LA, that might be just a room in like a 4-bedroom home. In fact, marriage is increasingly seen as something to opt in and out of, whether you're in one already or not. And these days, the choice for young people largely seems to be opt out. The average age that adults are getting married in the United States has significantly increased since the 1950s, with marriage rates in general on the decline. Meanwhile, Pew Research Center found that in 2021, a record 25% of 40-year-olds have never been married, up from just 6% in 1980. These stats suggest a growing number of young adults in their 20s and 30s are delaying or foregoing marriage altogether, with Gen Z having lower rates of marriage or being in couples due to things like the rise of independence and other various reasons. It makes it harder to imagine or strategize home ownership without that secondary income. Again, not saying that it's impossible, but definitely more difficult, because adding another person gives you more cards. Maybe their parents could be co-signers, or they've saved for a down payment. And if you have a stable and secure partner, that does make the process a lot easier. So like maybe since like we're not getting married, let's like forego like the lavender weddings and start picking up like lavender home ownership. Who wants to be my co-signing beard? And it's just really interesting to see how like our avoidance is bleeding into housing, because one thing about our generation, a lot of us are avoidant, and we can see that a bit in our living situations. When I talk to people about the prospect of being a homeowner, something that comes up a lot is like not wanting to be tied down, not wanting to commit to one place or a city for too long, which is valid, but still, yeah, it's like the concept of not wanting to put all your cards in one basket and commit to one place without really thinking about the long-term strategy of it all, if that's something that you ideally want. Now, I wanted to end this video off with a conversation around generational wealth, because I think that's an important part of this whole conversation, because I think that's a large reason around why we see the patterns in wanting to buy a house or an apartment or whatever or not, because there are definitely some systems at play that have historically prohibited and continues to discourage people of color, women, and other marginalized groups from owning property. People of color have historically been dissuaded from ownership, and that kind of thinking, like always wanting to rent as opposed to buying a home, gets passed down generationally, because you tend to aspire to things in your immediate vicinity, the people and things that you see around you.
Yeah, so growing up, we always lived in apartments. We moved a lot, actually. Not always apartments, always rented. Never, my mother didn't own. And so because of that, I knew that like people with more money owned homes. And so I kind of had this idea that like, one day I'll probably make more money and own a house, but it was not really like a specific goal in any way. I didn't really know too many people who own homes growing up, so that wasn't something I was really thinking about.
And there are many factors that have contributed to this, with some of the main ones being government policies that have historically supported white homeownership, but did not do the same for Black families, discrimination for private mortgage companies withholding services from red light neighborhoods, and offering higher rates and fees to minority borrowers, and finally, the economic well-being just generationally. White families have had the means to pass family inheritance, income, property, etc., whereas statistically Latino and Black families get less assistance from relatives or intergenerational inheritance than white Americans, which makes sense because we historically have not been on the upper hand of the economy and wealth building. If you or your family have been lifelong renters, it's easy to see why you might carry this mindset. And if you think that that's the best for your personal life and situation, then that's not a bad thing. But I think the purpose I want to serve in this video is to open up the conversation more and maybe see things outside of what we have traditionally seen as possible for us, even throughout this particularly frustrating time. I think it's also good to see and to know that home ownership isn't solely an individual thing or like a skill issue. Like by and large, it is kind of bigger than us. And when it is possible and represented for us, a lot of home buyers do have assistance, which again also is not a bad thing, but it's just to show that if buying a home or even like renting an apartment for you isn't a possibility for you right now, when it is for others, there are other external factors at play. But regardless of everything that's going on in the world, it is still important for us as young adults to take stock of our finances and our mentality surrounding housing, to reframe our personal narrative and exercise our personal choice to see what fits best for ourselves. This is to say that you don't have to take the general sentiment of, oh, we're screwed regardless. Don't even think about buying a house or like renting that apartment in this lifetime, because while those things can be true, they also are not the ultimate truth. As like many things in this life, we're all dealt a different deck of cards, and what we do with those cards is up to us and our business alone. So yes, while the state of the world has drastically impacted Gen Z's housing options, it is up to us to redefine what we want and where we're going from here.